Hello, I am Jennifer Lynn Purcell, aka Ever-Tuning Butterfly, bringing to you a living with an invisible learning challenge where we will discuss the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD. I don't know if you're a new listener or not, but I would like to share with you where I get most of my articles for this podcast. I've recently learned about a nonprofit that I would really like to help. It's the NVLD Project. In addition to doing research on NVLD and working to get it back on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is the DSM, they provide support groups for those with NVLD. You can find the NVLD Project at www.nvld.org. All proceeds from this podcast and the ads will go towards the NVLD Project. I will include the link for this in the description of the podcast. Please go to livingwithnld.com to learn more about my podcast. Also, I would like to announce that I now have created a YouTube channel for this podcast. I will post the link for this in the description for you. Hello, this is Jennifer Purcell. In today's podcast, we'll discuss what it's like trying to multitask, taking things literally, and the difficulty of reading between the lines with NVLD. According to NVLD from 9 to 5, an article from NLD Line, people with NLD or NVLD have challenges with, quote, seeing the big picture, multitasking, and taking things literally. They tend to talk their way through problem solving. They overwhelm supervisors and coworkers with questions in an attempt to have everything spelled out in black and white. End quote. I can definitely relate to this paragraph because I do remember times when my mom has told me that I'm not seeing the big picture or trees of the forest, as she likes to call them. She states that I tend to see more of the ladybugs or details of the situation of the topic rather than the big picture. For example, when I want to pay my mom back for something she bought, I know I have the money for it in my checking account. That's not the most important piece of information. I'm focused on the here and now rather than looking forward to later on in the month and considering other expenses that might come up. Usually someone with NVLD wouldn't do that. They would consider they wouldn't consider the big picture and budget for all of their expenses to make sure they had enough money for everything they had to pay for. For example, the essentials. That's what a neurotypical would do. I can also remember that when I was in college, it took me a long time to process the information I was learning. This is why it was extremely helpful for me to have the recording of my classes because I could use them when I would review for tests. It was easier for me to study with the recordings and more audio things than visual since my audio memory is the best out of kinesthetic, visual, and audio. I learned that from the tests that I took in college for diagnosing my learning challenge. When I was in middle school, I can remember it being very hard for me to read between the lines when I was reading things like poems or stories in English. I remember having to use SparkNotes, especially for Shakespeare, because I couldn't understand Old English, but with its help, that was so much easier. The only book of his I liked was The 12th Night because it was the easiest one for me to understand. The rest were quite difficult, like Romeo and Juliet. I was never good at reading comprehension, and I'm still not very good at it. I usually need my mom's help when I'm reading because there are many words that I don't know the definition of. And sometimes when I'm told the definition of, I still have a hard time remembering it. I have challenges with multitasking. It's difficult for me to record these episodes because I have to remember many things while I'm doing it, like pronouncing words correctly, talking slowly, giving emphasis when needed, and sounding cheerful. There were also many times when I took things too literally. I remember that when I was younger, I used to not be able to tell when my dad or brother or mom was teasing me because they always had a straight face when doing it. This made it hard for me to tell that they were joking with me or pulling my leg. So I took the joke literally. Now I know they are joking and trying to tease, and I'm trying to tease them back. But they don't always tease me in return, which makes it difficult for me to practice. Some examples of taking things too literally, and these are just general examples, that you take something to be true even when it may not be, especially if it's a metaphor. You think instructions may be very literal, like staring at the ground when you cross the street instead of looking for where the cars and things are around you. Or going to the extreme of a viewpoint being too black or white without some gray in the middle. Here's an excerpt from an article titled Chris Rock Reveals Learning Disorder Diagnosis. Says he has 7 hours of therapy a week about Chris Rock, the comedian who recently got diagnosed with NLD last year. Quote, he explained that he can take things too literally and has an all or nothing thinking, as the Hollywood Reporter described it. By the way, all of those things are great for writing jokes. They're just not great for one-on-one relationships yet. I'd always just chalked it up to being famous. Anytime someone would negatively respond to me, I'd think, whatever, they're responding to something that has to do with who they think I am. Now I am realizing it was me. A lot of it was me, end quote. I can relate to this quote because I do know that comedians like Chris Rock, Trevor Noah, and Stephen Colbert have helped me improve on picking up on jokes and sarcasm. Also, I can relate to what Chris Rock was saying about a lot of it was just me, because I can think back in my life to times when in social situations where I might not have known about NLD yet, but I'd be like, oh, is this how I'm responding to it because of NLD or because of, the other person? It's a little hard for me to describe. But maybe if you have NLD, you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. Basically, Chris Rock did a better job of saying it, but basically what I'm trying to say is if you have challenges being in a social situation and taking things too literally, you're like, oh wow, it was me, it wasn't the other person. So yeah, I can relate to him. So back to the comedians. They helped me because I began to watch their shows more as I was able to notice jokes more and laugh more along with my family, especially when I got into politics more as an adult. This makes it more fun for me because my parents and I watch these shows together as a family. Now I can say that I enjoy and like these shows more than I used to. I also try to joke with my friends more, like I noticed the other day my dog Truffles responded to me calling her girl, which is a good thing because she is a girl. But of course, I would have been okay if she hadn't responded to it. I also remember I used to have a hard time with not correcting other people when they said something that wasn't right or true. For example, the other night, my parents and I were watching Beat Bobby Flay on Food Network, and my dad said there was a previous chef who had gone against Bobby with apple strudel. I actually remember the show saying it was apple fritters, but I didn't correct him. I did not do that because it wasn't necessary to correct him. Sorry, that was a double negative. I was meaning that I didn't correct him because it wasn't necessary. Sorry, that's still double negative. Basically, it wasn't necessary to correct him. There you go. Sometimes double negatives can be confusing, so I was trying to get rid of that. Anyways, sometimes I do catch myself and I do correct people on little things like what time it is, and then I apologize for it because I usually notice it after the fact. The apology is important even if the person doesn't know you have NLD, because if you realize the correction wasn't necessary, then you should apologize for it, especially if you did it to a family member or a close friend. I also have to pay attention to what my thoughts are, because sometimes I think of comments that are necessary to tell. So I tell myself, Jennifer, that's not necessary. You don't need to say that. Sometimes I chuckle when I say that to myself, which is a good thing because I don't laugh very often. And I don't know about you, but maybe you need to laugh more. So whether it's trying to multitask or taking things too literally, or difficulty with reading between the lines, I and others with NLD still have challenges in these areas today. As I wrap up, I would love to hear from my audience. What do you tend to take too literally, or have challenges with multitasking or reading between the lines? You can comment on the episode on the website livingwithnld.com, or email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com if you're listening on Spotify. If you're listening to the Apple Podcast, then you can leave a review with the answer. I have recently created a resource page and a list of 26 things that neurotypical people can do to help people with NLD out a little bit more than they may already be doing. If you would like either of these, either the resource page or the list of, the other thing was a list of tests that I took for getting diagnosis of NLD. If you would like either of those, please email me and I will send them to you. Or, this is even easier, you can go to the podcast website and sign up for the newsletter, and I will send those to you as well in the newsletter. As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than originally it was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.